Good morning, guys. This is James. I am standing here in Plymouth, Massachusetts, where 400 years ago in 1620, Pilgrims arrived, and I'm about 300 yards away from Plymouth Rock, the place where the Pilgrims have been said to disembark from the Mayflower 400 years ago. Can you believe it? It's been 400 years since our forefathers and foremothers landed in this country and decided that they wanted freedom from tyranny of the English crown. They wanted freedom to practice their religious faith, freedom to live the kind of lives that they wanted for themselves and for their families. So I'm here, and this is a day after Memorial Day 2020, and I'm out here on what I'm calling the Freedom Tour at a time when our country is experiencing a lot of tension and strain between government leaders, these executive stay-at-home orders, and the independence and freedom that people desperately crave and have longed for and fought for over the last 400 years in our country. So I'm dedicating this tour to freedom for everybody who wants freedom, who fights for freedom, either as lawyers, as business people, as families, husbands, wives, individuals. Now is the time that we step up to continue to fight for long-lasting freedom for ourselves, for our children, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And I'm starting here in Plymouth, Massachusetts. We're going to make a few more stops throughout the state of Massachusetts, and I'm going to help you just go back in history, go back in time to the places that have mattered most in our country's history, so that we can all reconnect to the past and reconnect to the strong sense of freedom and liberty that made our country as great as it is. Off in the distance lies Plymouth Rock. I'm here in Plymouth, Massachusetts, location of the Mayflower landing, and it's hard to see from here. We're going to get a little closer in a moment, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what the town looks like here. We're out on a wharf right now, and it looks like a traditional coastal town, fishing town. You can see a lot of boats in the background. It's a foggy day, as you can tell, so it's hard to see very far, but as I turn to the left, you can see all the boats. And over the years, this wharf that I'm standing on is where the Mayflower, or one of its sister ships, or replica of one of these ships, will dock. They have a museum. Right now it's not here because of the government stay-at-home orders. Museums are closed. So many businesses are still closed. And in Massachusetts, they're just beginning to open the beaches to the public again. But I wanted to just give you an idea of this area just around Plymouth Rock, so you can see what we have out here. It's a beautiful town. Right now it's really quiet, probably because most people are still at home, but we'll get a closer shot of Plymouth Rock in a few moments. Standing right outside of Pilgrim Memorial State Park, and this is the location of Plymouth Rock. So let's get in a little closer and I'll show you exactly what the rock looks like. As you can see, it's right here along the coast, and as we look down, here is Plymouth Rock. As you can tell, it may not be as stately and grand as you thought, but they say it weighs about 8 to 10 tons, I believe. Let's see as we get a little closer here. It's got 1620 etched into it, and this is now in a safe place where nobody can disturb Plymouth Rock. As I pan forward a little more, looking east, you can see we're right along the coast, And this is said to be the exact place where the Pilgrims disembarked. Noted this large rock, the stability, solidity, foundation of early America, the colonists landing here, meeting with the Wampanoag Indians, Native Americans, and beginning this great country. We're gonna try to find a few other places here in Plymouth before we go, but this is the place known as Plymouth Rock. Standing right outside the first church in Plymouth, said to be the first place where pilgrims gathered on this hillside. As you can see, now has a cemetery and other buildings associated with the church. We're at the uptown part of Plymouth right now. As you can see, this is a magnificent church where records dating back to 1620 are intact, showing that the Pilgrims and successors worshipped in this very location and continue to do so today. I'm just going to pan around here now. This is the Church of the Pilgrimage, Congregational Church. And as we look down the hill at, I believe, First Street, may have been the original main street of Plymouth. You can see, if I can zoom in a little more, straight down the hill basically is where we started, near Plymouth Rock. It's a very quaint town, the town of Plymouth in Massachusetts. Beautiful place. Just wanted to stop to show you another one of the historical structures, these two churches right up on top of this hill. You're looking at the old Plymouth Courthouse. It was erected in 1749. Imagine that. 25-30 years before the United States was born. This building, this structure right here, was created, built 1749. It was used as a courthouse until about 1820, and then used as a townhouse and other meeting space years subsequent to that. Now it's a museum in order to retain some of the original history here in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Courthouse, the original courthouse, built in 1749. Welcome back. We are now in Quincy, Massachusetts, and as you can see, standing in front of the birthplaces of John Adams and John Quincy Adams, his son. So if you just imagine John Adams, born in the mid-1700s, you can get some sense of just the history here. I'm just going to walk around to see there's two houses. I'm not sure which one each of these men was born in, but they stand about 75 feet apart from each other. Unfortunately, everything's closed right now because of the coronavirus closures, but you can just get some sense of what things look like here. Try to zoom out a little more. Pretty traditional sort of New England structure. We go around. You can see it's a pretty quaint backyard. This one's under renovation, so it's got a big tarp, but just want to pan back to the other side of the first house, right on the corner of Water Street. And I believe this is the house where John Adams, our first vice president and second president, founding father, and also defense attorney, was born. And just to the right of it is the other house where his son was born. I'll try to get past the tarp here so you can try to get a sense of what this looks like. Again, more historical structure, Got the wood siding and a nice backyard, beautiful trees. Let's try to get a little better image of the backside. We're talking about 250, 260 years of history right here. It's amazing when you think about it. This is still the backyard. Try to center the backside of this house here. It's amazing how much history we have here in Massachusetts. Really where our country was born. When you think about things like the Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre, the Declaration of Independence, most of these things occurred right here in Massachusetts, where not only great men and women lived, but they were forward thinking in terms of creating a country and a legal system that protected individual rights and those key fundamental rights such as the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the separation of powers, separating the judicial, executive, legislative branches. All these things that it's easy to take for granted now, but the men and women back in the mid to late 1700s essentially created the systems, the constitutional structure that has protected us for the last 250 years. So again, we're in Quincy, Massachusetts, where John Adams and John Quincy Adams were born. Now we're going to move on in our freedom tour toward Boston and make a few stops there. We are now standing outside the country house where John Adams lived, in the very location where he died. This is an amazing house. I'm going to try to give you some sense of the grounds here. This has to be a good 5 to 7 acres or so. And when we read some of the letters in the archives of John Adams, he would spend time between this house here in Quincy on his farm and other locations in Quincy and also in Boston, where he did a majority of his work as an attorney and also as a founding father. You can just see how beautiful the grounds are here, and as we look around we can see the connection between history, the 1700s, and now the new millennium, 2020. You just go outside of this compound here, the streets are bustling as they usually are. It's just fascinating to really take a step back in time into this location that has stood here since the 1770s, 1780s. And when we think back to John Adams, he lived to be 90 years old. He died July 4th, I believe it was 1826, the same day as Thomas Jefferson, another great founding father. But John Adams and Abigail Adams lived here with their family. Abigail also passed away here in this very house, probably about 10 years before John Adams did. It is an amazing structure. We're gonna go around to the other side in front and I'll get a few more shots from that angle. But it's an amazing place, and some of the things we think about, I believe John and his family were here when the cannons at Bunker Hill were coming in from the English shortly before the Declaration of Independence was signed. So the history is just so deep and rich out in these areas. It's amazing. We're now on the other side, the west side, John Adams' country house. See their beautiful gardens and this huge tree. It's probably at least 100 years old. It's just a beautiful area. The grounds are really well kept. We'll walk closer to the house now. As we get closer, you can really get a sense of how big this house was, how big it is. I believe this is the west side of the house, and what is probably a stable, one of the storage outbuildings. But this is, looking at the side of the house, you can see how deep it is. And once we get in the front, you'll see how wide it really is, but it's gorgeous. Unfortunately, again, because the stay-at-home government orders, we can't get inside. It's not open to the public. The grounds are. So we're just trying to give you a glimpse of how beautiful this house is. We're now standing in the front of the house, and I just want to zoom into this John Adams quote. Let us dare to read, think, speak, and write. Obviously, John Adams was very well educated, and as one of our founding fathers, understood the importance of reading and understanding history, and also informing not only the Declaration of Independence but the Constitution. Understood the value of learning from history so that there was no repetition of the bad parts of history, such as the things the founders tried to avoid by building a constitution that would protect the U.S. from becoming something like Great Britain, which really formed the impetus for the Declaration of Independence in the first place. But this is the front of John Adams' country house. You can see how wide, how large this structure is, planted on 5 to 7, maybe 10 acres. It's just a gorgeous setting, and at some point I hope to get inside, check out quarters where John and Abigail and family lived. And as I understand it, the chair that John Adams actually died in remains in this house and can be seen by visiting the museum when it's open. So we are signing off here. We're going to leave Quincy, head up to Boston, see some other important sites, historical but also legal in nature, because John Adams, as a founding father, as a patriot, really was the lawyer statesman who crafted major parts of our Constitution, the constitutional protections that continue to protect our freedom and liberty today. Now standing in front of the John Adams Courthouse, right downtown Boston, Massachusetts. This is where the Superior Judicial Court is and the Appeals Court. And believe it or not, although this building isn't the oldest courtroom or court building in America, the original Superior Court, located in Boston, was built in 1692 and is the oldest existing appeals court that has been in continuous existence since then. So although this building wasn't around in 1692, it links back to the original court building, which was built before the 1700s, and as an appeals court has been in continuous existence since then. It's the oldest existing court in the Western Hemisphere. It's an amazing experience to be here and just to think about the history of this location. Things like the Boston Tea Party occurred not too far from here, 1772. The Boston Massacre trial, which took place in 1770, took place here in Boston, although again not at this courthouse. The courthouse where the Boston Massacre trial took place, I believe, was built in about 1768, and the Boston Massacre trial was housed there in 1770. It's where John Adams defended the British Captain Preston and several of his soldiers on murder charges, which makes him really one of the original and most famous defense attorneys to have defended criminals, the accused, defendants, whatever you want to call them, in American society going back to 1770. Which is why I love John Adams. I love learning about him. He was tenacious. He fought for freedom. He also fought for the rule of law and understood how important it was to defend those who were accused by government officials, by state agencies, understanding most of them had very little resources compared to the massive coffers of government prosecution and law enforcement. So again, we're standing outside of the John Adams Courthouse in Boston, Massachusetts. It dates back to 1692, the oldest appeals court to link back, what, more than 300 years. And now that we are here and it's 2020, it's more important than ever to uphold the principles of the Founding Fathers, principles of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, but also in the criminal legal system, the presumption of innocence, the right to legal counsel by the accused, the right to a fair trial. All of the things that we so often take for granted now were founded, were created, were formed dynamically by founding fathers such as John Adams. And also in this area in Boston, back in the 1770s, others like Sam Adams, John's cousin, the Sons of Liberty, the group that Sam Adams founded to begin that revolutionary spirit to fight for independence. And also John Hancock, one of the leading and wealthiest of the founding fathers, who worked together with John Adams and Sam Adams. And then also people like Paul Revere. You can still visit Paul Revere's house. It's not too far from here on the Freedom Trail here in Boston. But right now, when we focus on things like the legal system and the vitality of upholding legal rights, it happens in places exactly like this, the John Adams Courthouse. So this is where we're going to take a break on our freedom tour. I'm going to go with my wife. We're going to tour around the city a little bit, check out the North End, and try to enjoy some of the food, the Italian cuisine. And so we're signing off. This is a great place. If you can ever get out to Boston, check out the John Adams Courthouse. And remember the spirit of freedom and liberty that people like John Adams, Sam Adams, John Hancock, Paul Revere breathed into the United States of America. Bringing the Freedom Tour to an end here on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in the town of Barnstable. It is actually one of the oldest towns in Massachusetts, the first of 3 towns formed about 1683. And I'm here in the town of Barnstable, the original county of Barnstable, which includes all of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It was actually the first county seat of the first organized Massachusetts Bay Colony counties. And this is, well, it's not the first courthouse. It was the second courthouse built to replace the original courthouse here in Barnstable County. And this building right here was built in 1763. It was used as a courthouse until about 1824. What's interesting about this building here is that it essentially had one courtroom, and archives show that when there was a jury trial, the jury would actually deliberate at a nearby tavern. and then they'd come back to the courthouse and render their verdict. So there's a lot of history here. This courthouse was said to have been visited by John Adams at least one time, where he argued a case here, I believe in 1787. That was when attorneys and judges would ride the circuit. They would travel together from town to town, often not even using courthouses, but once courthouses were around, they would travel from one courthouse to another, handle the cases that were there for about a week, stay at the tavern, the local inn, hang out and have a good time, and then do their work together in the courthouse building before moving on to the next town and handling cases in that town. So again, this building is the old Colonial Courthouse. It was also dubbed the Old King's Courthouse because before the American Revolution in 1776, this was actually formally used or approved by the English Crown for the Massachusetts Bay Colony. One other piece of history that's interesting, especially in light of a lot of protests throughout the state, throughout our country, due to the coronavirus government orders, is that in 1774 there was a major protest by the colonists against the crown because there was growing unease, and this was shortly after the Boston Tea Party. And so the colonists protested the crown and actually were first to break free from English rule in 1774, before the Declaration of Independence was signed and before the fighting began up in Boston, Massachusetts. So again, I'm here in the town of Barnstable, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. There's so much history here. It's so fascinating to be in a place where not only greats like John Adams argued cases, but the precursors to the United States were dealing with justice, were solving disputes. And it helps me think more clearly about the purpose of the legal system. It simply is to resolve disputes in society. And that's been happening ever since the dawn of society. And when we can trace back our American roots to these places where justice was meted out, justice was sought after by attorneys, judges, juries, just like it is today, we can see how important the judicial system has been, how important attorneys, judges have been in history in terms of keeping balance between tyranny and mob rule, and also helping people solve their disputes in fair and equitable ways. So this is going to be the last stop on the Freedom Tour here in Massachusetts. I hope this has been helpful. If you get a chance to come out here, there's so much history. It's an amazing place. Let me just end by noting some of the well-known people that either were born in or lived out some part of their career in Massachusetts. Obviously we know John Adams, his wife Abigail Adams, also John Quincy Adams, their son, who was also the 6th president. Greats like Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., one of the Supreme Court justices in the 1800s, was from Massachusetts. Susan B. Anthony, Edgar Allan Poe, Henry David Thoreau. There's so many other people who have been formed by this land of liberty. And when we think about the greatness of our country, so much of it can be traced back to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, to the justice, the freedom that they fought for, but also to the greats in Boston who ultimately spearheaded the revolution and formed the infant country, the United States. So I'm signing off here. I hope this has been helpful. If you get a chance to come out to Barnstable, Cape Cod, Massachusetts, it's a great place.